Welcome back to Chess Tactic today. In round 8 of the FIDE Grand Swiss 2025, we get a clash of styles. The creative genius Richard Rapport against the young superstar Praggnanandhaa. Right from the opening, Rapport throws in wild ideas with rook lifts and piece sacrifices, while Praggnanandhaa counters with sharp pawn pushes and fearless defense. Queens invade, pawns race down the board, and both players look for the knockout punch. This one is pure fireworks from start to finish. And here we go! Richard Rapport opens with knight to f3. This is a classic flexible move, avoiding commitment to a specific pawn structure and keeping his options wide open. He's asking black, "All right, Prag, what have you got for me?" Praggnanandhaa immediately replies with pawn to d5, staking his claim in the center. This is a solid, classical response, challenging White's control from the very first move. No messing around. White plays pawn to c4. This is the Queen's Gambit setup, but from a Reti opening move order. Rapport is putting immediate pressure on Black's central d5 pawn, creating tension right away. And in response, Prag plays pawn to e6. A very solid choice. He reinforces his d5 pawn and prepares to develop his kingside pieces. It's a quiet move, but it signals he's ready for a strategic fight. Pawn to g3 from Rapport. This is the trademark of the Catalan opening. The plan is simple but powerful. His light-squared bishop will go to g2, where it will become an absolute monster, slicing across the long diagonal. Prag develops with knight to f6, the most natural move on the board. He controls key central squares and prepares to castle his king to safety. Everything is proceeding along classical lines for now. As expected, bishop to g2. Rapport's bishop now stares down the board like a sniper, putting long-term pressure on Black's position. This piece will be a major character in our story today. But wait! Praggnanandhaa plays the ambitious pawn to d4. This is a fascinating decision. He's not content to sit back. Instead, he seizes space and challenges White's setup directly. The downside? That d4 pawn can become a weakness later on. A bold, double-edged choice. Rapport calmly castles kingside. He gets his king safe before starting any major operations in the center. He's telling Prag, "Your pawn push is interesting, but I'm not worried." Prag develops his knight to c6, adding another defender to the d4 pawn and preparing to control the center. The battle lines are being drawn around that key square. And here comes the challenge. Pawn to e3. Rapport immediately begins to undermine Black's advanced pawn. This move prepares to push his own d-pawn and blow the center wide open. Prag fights fire with fire. Pawn to e5. He reinforces his d4 pawn and says, "If you want to fight for the center, you've got one." The position is now incredibly tense and tactical. Rapport captures. Pawn takes d4. He releases some of the central tension, but this is all part of a plan to open lines for his pieces. The board is about to ignite. Wow, what a move! Instead of recapturing, Prag thrusts his pawn forward to e4, kicking the white knight. This is a brilliant intermediate move that completely changes the game. It creates chaos and puts Rapport on the back foot. Rapport is forced to move his knight, and he chooses ng5. From here, it attacks the weak f7 square and keeps an eye on other key points. The position is becoming exceptionally sharp. Now Prag cashes in, with knight takes d4. He's won his pawn back, his e4 pawn is a thorn in White's side, and his pieces are active. An excellent sequence from the young star. Rapport brings his rook to e1, putting pressure on that advanced e4 pawn and developing another piece. This is a very logical move, trying to regain control. Prag develops his bishop to e7, defending the e4 pawn indirectly and preparing to castle. He is methodically untangling his pieces amidst the chaos. Rapport decides to resolve the tension. Knight takes the pawn on e4. He eliminates the troublesome pawn, but this allows Black to simplify into a more comfortable position. Prag recaptures. Knight takes knight. A simple, strong move. The central files are now open, and both sides will be fighting for control of them. And Rook takes knight. Rapport's rook is now very active in the center of the board, but it's also a little bit exposed. This is a double-edged sword. Right away, Pragg challenges that rook with bishop to f5. He wastes no time creating threats and forcing his opponent to make difficult decisions. A great example of the principle of initiative. Rapport moves the rook to e5, a very clever square. It keeps the rook active, attacks the g7 pawn, and sidesteps the immediate threat. The tactical dance continues. Queen to d6 from Pragg. This move does everything. It defends the g7 pawn, prepares to connect the rooks, and puts pressure on white's position. A beautiful multi-purpose move. Oh, unbelievable! Richard Rapport plays rook takes bishop on f5. This is a stunning exchange sacrifice. He's giving up his rook for a bishop, but in return he shatters black's kingside pawn structure and exposes the black king. Is this brilliant, or is it madness? The fireworks have officially begun. Pragg has no choice but to accept. Knight takes rook on f5. He is now up the exchange, but his position is strategically very tricky. Rapport's bishop on g2 is now an unopposed monster. And there's the follow-up. Bishop takes the pawn on b7. Rapport immediately begins to collect on his investment, grabbing a key pawn and putting pressure on black's queenside. Pragg responds with rook to d8, a crucial move. He defends the back rank and gets his rook into the game, preparing to fight back against white's initiative. Rapport gives a check with queen to a4. He forces the black king to move, preventing him from castling and keeping him stuck in the center. This is exactly the kind of compensation he was looking for. The king steps to f8. It's not ideal, but it's the only move. Pragg's king will be a potential target for the rest of the game, and he has to play with extreme care. Knight to c3. Rapport continues his development, bringing a new piece into the attack. Every move now is about increasing the pressure on black's vulnerable king. And here comes the counterattack. Praggnanandhaa lashes out with pawn to h5. He understands that the best defense is a good offense. He's going to create his own threats against the white king, and he's doing it with tremendous speed and energy. Rapport plays bishop to e4, a calm positional move in the middle of a storm. He blocks the e-file and challenges Pragg's active knight on f5. Queen to e6 from Pragg. He repositions his queen to a more active square, keeping an eye on the white king and supporting his own attack. The tension is just ratcheting up with every move. Pawn to d3. A very important solidifying move from Rapport. He shores up his center and finally gives his dark-squared bishop a path to join the game. Pragg immediately challenges the bishop with knight to d6. He wants to trade off one of white's key attacking pieces. If you're under attack, trading pieces is often a great strategy. Rapport retreats his bishop to g2. He's not interested in a trade. That bishop pair is one of his main advantages, and he intends to keep it. Check! Queen to e1. Pragg forces the issue, driving the white bishop from its best square and disrupting white's coordination. Bishop to f1 is forced. The bishop blocks the check, but now it's a bit more passive. A small victory for black in this ongoing tactical battle. And the h-pawn marches on! Pragg continues his kingside assault with h4. He's trying to rip open the files around the white king. This is getting incredibly dangerous for both sides. Rapport plays g4, clamping down on the king's side and blocking the advance of the h-pawn. But this also creates weaknesses of its own. It's a risky but necessary decision. Pawn to h3. Pragg fixes the pawn there as a permanent thorn in white's side. It restricts the white king and will be a major factor in any future attack. While his king side is under fire, Rapport calmly plays queen takes a7. He's a pawn hunter. He's betting that his attack on the queen side is faster than Pragg's on the king side. A thrilling race is on. Here comes the heavy artillery. Pragg swings his rook over to h4. This is a classic rook lift, bringing a major piece into the attack down the open h-file. The threat to the white king is now very real. Pawn to f3, a critical defensive move from Rapport. He has to create a shield for his king, but this further weakens the light squares. Can he hold on? What a creative idea! Knight to b7 from Praggnanandhaa. This looks strange at first, but the knight is rerouting to a more active square where it can join the attack. A fantastic piece of improvisation under pressure. Rapport improves his knight to e4. This is a beautiful central outpost for the knight, where it helps with both defense and potential attacks of its own. Boom! Pragg unleashes another sacrifice. Rook takes pawn on d3. He smashes open the center to get at the white king. He is playing with incredible courage, throwing everything he has into this attack. But Rapport stays cool under pressure. Queen to f2. An absolutely brilliant defensive find. He offers a queen trade, which would neutralize black's attack, and simultaneously defends against the immediate threats. What a clutch move! Pragg declines the trade with queen to d1. He wants to keep the attacking chances alive, but Rapport's defense has been superb. The momentum might be shifting. Rapport insists. Queen to e2. He forces the issue. Now Pragg must either trade queens or retreat, and either way, white's position is improving. Pragg moves his rook back to d7, preparing for the queen trade. He sees that the attack is fizzling out, and it's time to transition into an endgame. The queens come off the board. Queen takes queen. The tactical storm has passed, and we are now heading into a very interesting endgame. Rook takes queen. Pragg is still up the exchange, but white has two powerful bishops and better pawn structure as compensation. The game is far from over. King to f2. In the endgame, the king becomes a fighting piece. Rapport activates his king, bringing it towards the center where it can control key squares. Knight to c5 from Pragg. He's trying to trade off white's strong knight on e4 to reduce white's attacking potential, a very practical decision. Rapport avoids the trade, playing knight to c3. He wants to keep his pieces on the board to pose problems for black. Check! Knight to d3. A clever little trick from Pragg, forcing a trade of a minor piece for one of white's dangerous bishops. Bishop takes knight. Rapport is forced to capture, giving up his bishop pair. This is a big concession and brings the game closer to a draw. Rook takes bishop. The position simplifies further. Black has a rook for a knight and a pawn, but white's pieces are active, and that h3 pawn is a nuisance. Rapport establishes a beautiful outpost for his knight on d5. From here, it controls the whole board and restricts black's pieces. Pragg challenges that knight with bishop to d6. A good, solid move, trying to neutralize white's best piece. Bishop to g5. Rapport pins the rook on h8, creating more problems for black to solve. Even in the endgame, he's finding ways to be tricky. The rook moves to h8, breaking the pin. Pragg is defending accurately. King to e2. The white king continues its march up the board, putting pressure on the black rook. Rook to d4. A very active square for the rook, where it attacks the b3 pawn and controls key files. Pawn to b3, defending against the threat. A necessary move to keep the position stable. Pragg cashes in. Bishop takes the pawn on h2. He gets a pawn for his troubles, but this allows white's rook to become very active. Rook to h1. Suddenly, the black bishop is trapped. What a turn of events. Rapport has created a powerful threat out of nowhere. Pragg finds the only move, bishop to d6. He prepares to give up the bishop to eliminate white's dangerous knight. Bishop to e3, attacking the rook. This move forces the final sequence of the game. The tactical complications are finally coming to an end. And there it is, the final combination. Rook takes knight on d5. Pragg sacrifices his rook to eliminate white's strongest piece, liquidating into a dead-drawn endgame. A beautiful, calculated end to the fight. Pawn takes rook. White gets the material back, but now the position is completely simplified. King to e7. Pragg's king rushes to the center to stop white's pawns. With opposite-colored bishops off the board, neither side has enough to force a win. Rapport plays pawn to f4, trying to create one last chance, but it's not enough. Pragg pushes his pawn to h2. This pawn is a hero, forever preventing the white king from infiltrating. At this point, the players know the result. King to f3. Rapport brings his king over, but there's simply no way to make progress. And with that, the players agree to a draw. And that's a draw. What an incredible game. A theoretical battle that exploded into a tactical masterpiece with sacrifices from both sides. In the end, their brilliance was perfectly balanced. A fitting result for a truly spectacular fight. Thanks for watching Chess Tactic Today.